Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Fusion 21 webinar, Zero Carbon Electric Vehicle Charging Points. My name's Andrew Gray, and I'm the Memberships Relation Manager at Fusion21, and you're all very welcome this afternoon. Just a little bit of housekeeping. There's no fire alarm due. Oh no, I haven't got to say that, but I can't guarantee that the doorbell isn't going to go. In fact, one of our speakers has just been interrupted, and that's why we're a little bit late starting. I can't confirm that the cat's not going to make an appearance, but more seriously, if any of you aren't familiar with the software this afternoon, you can minimize the panel in front of you by clicking the orange arrow. If you are having any difficulties with the audio, you can adjust the audio settings using the audio tab. But perhaps most importantly, we do want you to feel a part of today's webinar. And so do please ask any questions of the panel using the question panel again on the panel on the right hand side of your screen. In terms of questions, hopefully we will be able to get through them this afternoon, but if we don't, again, the speakers have agreed that they will get back to us after we record all of the questions, and we'll get back to you with those answers in due course. And of course, we will make a copy of this presentation available on our website at the end of the session. So, in terms of introduction, as many of you will know, the government published only yesterday their new 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. Part 4 of that plan is entitled Accelerating the Shift to Zero Emission Vehicles. And I did have to thank Boris personally for the timing of the paper just in time for today's webinar. What the headlines from point 4 are that by 2030, the government will end the sale of new petrol and diesel cars and vans, and that's 10 years earlier than originally planned. But the other exciting news is that they plan to invest 1.3 billion to accelerate the rollout of charging infrastructure. In particular, it says targeting rapid charge points on motorways and major roads, and installing more on-street charge points near homes and workplaces to make charging as easy as refueling a petrol or diesel car. So today's webinar is very timely in relation to that announcement, and hopefully over the course of the next hour or so, you will learn from our panel in terms of their expertise and what they're doing. In advance of that, I just thought I would share with you Fusion21's journey. We too have been committed to installing electric charging vehicle points at our office. Initially, we had 2. Like many of you, we had grants available, but during lockdown, we've increased the provision and installed a further 7 charging points. And again, we hope that one day we'll actually be able to get back to the office, so those with electric vehicles will be able to take advantage of those new charging points. But anyway, as an organisation, Fusion is committed to this agenda, and I thought it would be interesting just to share that with you. So, without further ado, let's get on to the main business of this afternoon. And I'm delighted to invite and to be joined by today's panel. We have Alasdair Croft, who's Managing Director of AmpEV, Martin Sleath, who's the Sustainability Advisor at the Lake District National Park Authority, and my colleague John Farley, who's Framework Manager at Fusion21. So, oops, I've gone too far. So without further ado, I'm now happy to hand over to Alasdair, who will go through his presentation. So over to you, Alasdair.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join us this afternoon. What we're hoping to achieve today is to give everybody a baseline understanding of what EV charging is and what needs to be considered. At the end of this, we hope that you have taken away with you a more richer understanding and the next steps. You will be given our contact details should you want to discuss requirements any further. And if you wish to explore EV charging some more, you're more than welcome to contact me. Okay, so making sure that technology is on our side and the slides are moving at my control, which they are. Good. Okay, so who are we? We are EV charging specialists. We have relationships with all the top EV charging manufacturers, and we are employed by most of them to employ chargers on their behalf. We're based in Southport in Merseyside. We've been going for 3 years. We've had quite a journey over the last 3 years, and we've seen the world of EV charging evolve. What makes us different is that we're not manufacturers and we don't sell our own product. We have a niche that we are specialists, and we appreciate that all chargers have their differences. They have their quirks and their USBs, and we sit down with our clients and understand their needs and their limitations, and we advise our clients what is the best charger and the best solution for them. Okay, so why is EV so important? Well, energy saving and carbon footprint. How much CO2 does a diesel or petrol car create? So we've got some examples here, which are taken off the carbonfootprint.com website. An average petrol car traveling 10,000 miles will produce 2.91 tons of CO2. An average diesel car doing the same mileage is 5.7 tons of CO2, and a van 6.83 tons of CO2. So to put this into context, as a general rule of thumb, we can calculate that 4 mature trees will offset 1 ton of CO2. Of course, that's quite a lot of CO2 to offset, and with the government's announcement yesterday, it's clearly very important to everybody that we reduce these CO2 levels and the country's carbon footprint. But is CO2 enough of an incentive for organisations at this moment in time to switch to an alternative? Probably not. However, what we're going to do is we're going to show you what would be some incentives in cost savings. So a small car, if you were to switch a small car to an EV car, you're looking at an annual saving based on 10,000 miles of £913. Medium car is now £1,300 saving, and a large car close to £2,000 saving. On the next slide, we're going to show you a cost saving calculator, because some organisations who have got multiple fleet cars, the saving is very considerable. Now, we're on a wave. EV cars are becoming more and more important to us, and we can see this in some stats here. So in August of this year, 330,000 plug-in EV cars were registered. There are now 200 various manufacturers and products and models of EV cars. There were 10,200 EV vans registered, and at the moment we've got 33,190 UK charge points available according to ZapMaps. Now there are more than that, because not all EV chargers are linked to ZapMap, but it's certainly giving you a flavour of how the momentum of EV cars and the EV charging infrastructure is gaining. On our website, and you're more than welcome to use this, completely free to use. If you want to take a note of our website, please feel free to do it. But we have a number of calculators on there. And this is an opportunity for you to type in specifics or particulars of your organization, so you could work out how much fuel saving you are likely to witness. So the example that I've put on the screen here is 5 cars. Miles per gallon of those cars, we average it at 40. If your organisation or each one of those cars is doing around 18,000 miles per year, we've got the cost of fuel set per litre at 1.24. That's been reduced. You know, we've seen the cost of fuel come down. EV range, I've set that to 180. Now, there are cars that do more and there are cars that do less, so it's a good average to aim for. Cost of electricity. Business rates, according to Google at the moment, the average business rate is 14.7 pence per kilowatt. And an average charge time based on 7 kilowatts is about 8 hours. So if you were to press that calculate button, you will see that your fuel costs per annum would be in the region of about £12,600. Cost per charge would be about £8.23. So your electricity costs for that per annum would be £4,116. Your fuel savings per month would see in the region of £714. And over the year, that would be 8,567. And that's based on 5 vehicles. So as you can appreciate, if you're an organisation with 10, 20, 50, 100 fleet vehicles, the savings are considerable. And all of a sudden, when we explain this to organisations, they start getting a little bit more excited than they would in giving them numbers on how much CO2 that they would save. What normally naturally comes next is the question of where does all the electricity come from? How's the grid going to be able to cope with this demand with all these EV charges plugging in? And it's a good question, and it's an interesting one. We are currently installing electric vehicle chargers for the national grid. All their depots up and down the country where they've got their big transformer stations, they are rolling out their own fleet management of replacing their vehicles to electric vehicles, because of course they've got the power of abundance and they can have rapid charges at each one of their stations, so when their engineers approach, they can charge their cars while they're on site. And I've asked them the question, what are you guys doing? How are you preparing for this? And they really are hanging their hat on three major contributions. Is the contribution from solar. You may or may not be aware of the amount of solar farms that are going up around the country. Not power all around the year, but it's a good contribution. And that linked with some very clever management battery, some energy management battery storage, that energy can be stored and called upon when needed. But quite interestingly enough is that they really are hanging their hat on the amount of energy that they are going to save by everybody switching to LED lighting. They really are very confident that if we can all switch over from the metal halide lamps and move to LED, the savings are going to be very considerable. And very interestingly enough, and it's not new technology, it has been around, but it's now coming into its own more and more, hydrogen power. Now, we've become agents for an energy company who have developed and manufactured a hydrogen power plant that fits in a 10-foot metal container. And there's an image of it just below here. Initially, this was designed to put in locations where there is no grid connection, but it's now becoming obvious that these are going to be required up and down the country to supplement the grid where there's high need for EV cars, or certainly properties that have a high level number of EV cars, that they could also be used as backup generators, replacing those big old diesel generators that cost a fortune to keep running. And if you can see my pointer on my mouse, what you can't see on the image is that there is a cage of ammonia bottles, liquid ammonia. And what happens is that the ammonia comes into this first cabinet, which is known as the ammonia cracker. It cracks the ammonia and extracts the hydrogen properties from it. And then this is the turbine. And then that turbine produces the electrical energy, which can feed all the EV chargers and perhaps the backup generator to a building. So this technology is becoming more and more important, and I think we'll see a lot more of that over the next couple of years. The governments are clearly making their position well known, as we've seen this week. We expect some more funding to become available, but what is available to us right now and what is available to you right now? So there's what's known as the Workplace Grant, the WEC, and that is £350 per bay for up to 40 bays. So everybody is entitled to £14,000 worth of government funding to support them with EV charging at their workplace. But other items to consider of why it would be a good idea to switch to EV is it incentivizes your staff. They have cars. Costs of running those cars are expensive. Staff switching to electric vehicles, it will save them money in the running costs. And of course, if you've got chargers at your workplace, they may call upon those. Changing your existing fleet. So we've talked about the fuel saving and the importance of that. To provide a service for your visitors. Visitors are going to be turning up and expecting charge points to be made available. Just going to switch back to that slide. It jumped. Andrew, might need your support on this one. It's jumped a slide and I've lost control of it. There we go. Have I got control? There we go. Sorry about that. Improve your greener credentials, the CO2 image. Future grid trading potential. If you've got solar and you're generating your own power, you can store it and you can sell it back to the grid, offsetting some of your energy costs. And there's a pro CRM fleet management side to things. Some of our chargers are portal based, and for people to use them, they have to input their information, and organizations are using this system as a form to collect data. Now, at home, there are also grants available known as the OLEV scheme, and that is also £350 per vehicle. It's a maximum of 2 cars per property. You do have to prove that you've either purchased the car or you have ordered one, but that funding is there to help you at home. And there's also on-street residential charge point scheme. It's come more apparent, Andrew alluded to it at the beginning, but not many local authorities knew that this existed. Because of course, if you live in a terraced house and you don't have a drive, how does one charge their electric vehicle when it's parked on the street? There's only really the south, more particular London, that seems to have really kind of started pushing for this. And there's some quite elegant solutions out there. There's ones that pop up out the ground, and there's also some fairly budget solutions where we've seen them just strapped onto the side of a lamppost. So there's various different solutions, but the government have made £20 million available for that, and that is available to local authorities that want to pursue it. Now, the benefit in kind. A lot of organisations and employers are becoming under increasing pressure from their employees that have company vehicles, because of now, if the car was registered after April 2020, you don't pay any benefit in kind on that company vehicle. So it's 0% on the vehicle, and of course there's no fuel, so that's 0% on the benefit in kind of the fuel. So if the employee is a higher rate of taxpayer, they could potentially be saving about £8,000 per year, which of course is is not a sniff to anybody. So employers are becoming under increasing pressure from the employees to switch to EV. Now, installers, to gain access to this funding, the installers must be OLEV and WEC accredited. That's the only way that you can kind of tap into that money. Okay, so now the education on the EV products. There are different types of chargers, and we'll talk about the sockets first. So for AC charging, the industry has finalized on the Type 2 plug socket. There was a Type 1, but that's slowly being phased out. But there are certain vehicles that are still out there with Type 1. But everyone seems to have settled on this Type 2. Now for DC charging, and I will explain the AC and the DC charging in a moment, there are two types of plugs. We've got the CCS and we've also got the CHAdeMO. So please be careful that if you are considering DC chargers at your workplace, then make sure that the plugs at the end of the cable will fit your car that you've ordered, because there are these options. Okay, so the different types of chargers and the size of them. Now, please take this as indicative because different manufacturers categorize fast, ultra fast and rapid in different categories. But in the main, fast is 7 kilowatts to 11 kilowatts. Ultra fast is 22 to 25 and rapid is 25, 50 and above. Now, fast up to 7 kilowatts is single phase charging. Anything above that, you need 3 phases of charging. So please be mindful of that. And that's why 7 kilowatts is really the maximum that you can have in a domestic, because most domestic homes only have a single phase supply. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to explain the charging time and how it affects the size of the charger to the car. Okay. So we're going to borrow this calculator, which is off a great website called homechargingstations.com. The battery size. Now, I'm going to base this on the Tesla 3. The Tesla 3 medium range is a 75 kilowatt car, but the usable battery capacity of it on its data sheet is only 62. So we set that to 62. We'll take this down to 10%. You wouldn't be turning up to a car charger with 0% because you wouldn't have got there. But let's just set that at 2. Now, a lot of EV cars, certainly Tesla, they limit the charging capacity up to 80%. There's a number of reasons for this, but you can override that. And my Tesla, I've got it set at 90. Okay, so let me just bring this on screen. 7.4 kilowatts, so that's the maximum that you can have at home. And that would provide a charging time of 7 hours and 26 minutes. Now, if we increase that to 11, it reduces to 5. Taking that to 22, takes that down to 2 hours and 30. And then we move into the world of DC charging. Let's go to 50, 1 hour and 6 minutes. And if you've got 100 kilowatts of charging, now reduces that to 33 minutes. So you can see how the size of the charger can have a big effect on the charging time of the vehicle. Now, there are 3.6 kilowatt chargers on the market. We do try and steer away from them. For the reason being is that we don't really see it as being fit for purpose. If you look at the charging time at the bottom of the screen, it's saying 15 hours. It's enough to put something in the car, maybe to get you to the next destination or to get you home. But my personal view is it's not really practical to go for 3.6. So most people will start at 7. Okay. Now, what to look out for? We also don't recommend 11 kilowatts. For the reason being is that 11 kilowatts is made up of 3.6 kilowatt chargers, one on each phase. So each one of these pins is connected to a phase. Not all cars have 3-phase charging. The higher end, the Teslas, the Land Rovers, they do have 3-phase charging, but some of the more cost-effective and the entry-level cars do not. They're only connected to one pin. So you could install an 11 kilowatt charger, and some cars will get the full benefit of 11 kilowatts. But there are some cars that would turn up, and because their internal battery system is only connected to one of those pins, they will only get 3.6 kilowatts, which, as we said on the previous slide, is 15 hours charge time. So it's sometimes not fit for purpose. 22 kilowatts is built up of 3 7.4 kilowatt chargers. Now, if you've got a 3-phase charging car, you will get the full benefit of 22. However, if you do not, and you have a single-phase car, then at least you are getting one 7.4 kilowatt charger from it. So it goes back into the ballpark of being usable. So we don't really promote 11 kilowatt chargers for that very reason. As cars move on, we may find that all cars as default or as standard will have 3-phase charging. Okay, what do the chargers look like? So this is taken from our brochure. Commercial chargers, wall-mounted pedestals. They do look like this. There's a couple of manufacturers here that we've showcased. Singles or duals, you can have a charger at either end. So one of these posts can provide 2 bays. And these are 3 times faster than a standard 3-pin plug based on 7 kilowatts. You can get them in 7, 11 and 22. And this is our site over at Meadow Hall in Sheffield, where we fitted 56 of these chargers. They're all lined up in a row like that. Very elegant solution. The rapid chargers, these are what you tend to see on service stations and petrol garages. And this picture here is Martin's site up in Kendal for the Lake District National Parks, and they've got 2 rapid chargers because they have fleet turnover. Their vehicles are used quite heavily during the day, and they need to turn those cars around quite quickly. The domestic chargers, we've got examples of the Zappi and the PodPoint unit, and an action shot there. Again, domestic, you're always limited to 7 kilowatts because you've only ever got, in the main, a single-phase supply. Now, this slide here is about the online EV charger management portal. Some of our chargers go GPRS or Ethernet over to the satellites, and you can manage them and monitor them via an online portal, but we're going to come to that later on in the slides. Okay, things to consider. Installer standards and accreditations. OLEV approved, and also must be able to demonstrate electrical competence, and that's normally done with accreditations such as the NIC, EIC or Lexa. We have there's oh, I don't know that. Excuse me 2 seconds. Lexa and Alexa sounded very similar. Right, that won't happen again. Okay, so there's also groundworks and civils to consider. You know, where do you want these chargers to go? We may have to go through tarmac or grass verges. So when considering the installation costs of putting EV chargers in, we've got to consider the groundworks that are involved. Now, there are also limitations to your property. You may only have single phase. If you have three phase, it may be limited perhaps on a 100 amp fuse. If your building is currently drawing 80 amps, then you've only got 20 amps per phase left. So the charging capacity that you have available is limited. That can be increased. You contact your DNO and they will give you some fairly high numbers to increase those. And if you've got a large fleet that you're trying to cater for, you may even be having to pay for an on-site substation to be installed. But there are technical solutions to overcome this, and one of which is dynamic load balancing. And this YouTube video explains it very, very well. Okay, so what we have here is we have the building has its load or its demand, and this is without dynamic load balancing. So you can see the cars approaching, they're drawing upon it, too many cars, and all of a sudden it fails and it blows the fuse. So with dynamic load balancing, the demand on the building stays the same during the day, and as EV cars approach, it draws on that power, but you can see the cars lowering as it's now power sharing the available power between the EV cars. Always never affecting the building. As cars leave, you will see that the power available increases to share between the cars. Now what we'll do is we'll go through that one again. Also notice on the video the daylight and the night time. So that's the only time that the demand of the building is affected. So there we see the fuse has failed. And then we implement dynamic load balancing. We see the power sharing evenly between the cars. And then as cars leave, the power increases. One way of making the best use of the available power. Okay, how to get a return on your investment. So we can generate an income off EV chargers. Here is one platform that we use, which is called EV Charge Online, and this is what the driver would view. So you can see all the chargers that are available. Your charger would be on this map. You can select it for public realm use or not, but when the driver approaches, they would type in the number or a CQ code, and if it's a registered driver, they would draw a charge off it. Now, when charging for this use, the driver would load up his wallet, and that is connected to his debit card or credit card, and they would load funds into that wallet. And every time the car calls upon it, that wallet is then debited. The money comes back to you via World Pay, so you get paid out, or the organisation who owns those charges get paid out monthly. And of course, that income against your energy bill will offset costs. And of course, we can configure those costs with driver groups that should you want to charge certain drivers more than others, you've got the functionality to do that. We're going to talk about business cases in a moment. So I've put together 3 business cases. These may be, you may be able to apply your organisation to one of these business cases. It's there to give you a good flavour of what can be done with EV charging. So we talk about business case 1, which is a school with staff parking. Schools don't often have company vehicles, so we have some options available. We can install EV chargers and we can make them all free to use. It would cost the school the energy cost. Option 2 is we could charge the staff and the visitors to pay for some of that energy cost. Now, that would either be to meet the cost or slightly increase, or we could have it free for staff and just charge the visitors. Business case number 2, an organisation with company vehicles. So the fuel cost saving from switching to electric. Now, we discussed earlier the fuel savings that we are likely to see, the reduction in the carbon footprint. And these are the options that are available to us. Is we could make the chargers free to use for anybody, and we are just incurring the cost of charging our fleet of vehicles, which, as we've discussed, would be considerably less than paying for diesel or petrol. Option 2, we can charge the staff and visitors for the use while charging our fleet of vehicles. Option 3, we could charge our staff, but it could be complimentary for visitors. And again, we are charging our vehicles at a reduced cost. Now, business case 3, organisations with company vehicles, but they have a suitable location where they could make their EV charging infrastructure available to the public. So we've got the fuel saving from switching to electric, we've got the reduced carbon footprint, but we can now generate a return on investment by offering the public a service. So again, all of the free options that we've discussed on the previous business cases, but the big difference with this one now is that we could now increase the charge to the public, which would not only return our cost of the energy, but we can also put some profit on there. So we're starting to have a return on our investment. Right, guys, that's me coming to the end of my slides. Thank you for listening. I hope I've provided some good information there for you all. Open for questions at the end. Here's my contact details if you want to explore your EV charging needs any further. But I'm going to hand over to Martin now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alasdair. And
okay, Martin, over to you.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Andrew. Thank you, Alasdair. So I'm here primarily, I think, as a sort of a living example, a case study. We are a customer of AmpEV at the Lake District National Park. So I'm putting this in the context of our transition to net zero as an organisation, and I am the sustainability advisor for the Lake District National Park Authority. So most of my job is to do with carbon accounting, producing reports, analysing emission data to look for where we can make the biggest impact on our carbon emissions. So just to put us into context, the Lake District, we're up here in the top left-hand corner of England. We're the biggest national park in England at 2,362 square kilometres. Obviously, we're very mountainous, we're very wet. We're sat within Cumbria, and the purple outline is the extent of the Lake District National Park. Our vision is to be an inspiration example of sustainable development in action. That covers all of our work. We're kind of equivalent to a district council in a way. We're sort of a local authority, but we're a bit different from typical local authorities. So we have between 150 to 200 staff or so. It's a seasonal number because we have various seasonal locations where people work. We have 4 office or depot locations. We have 4 visitor or information centres. We have 1 boating centre over here at Coniston Water. We have around 20 or so public toilets and a number of public car parks, some of which are chargeable and some of which are free. And Our staff typically have site visits and meetings across the whole national park and outside of the national park in Cumbria. So our headquarters are here at Kendal, where the bigger red star is, but staff are travelling all over the national park, and the road network within the national park obviously isn't that great because we're very restricted to valleys in between the mountains. There's one major route running north to south, the A591. Aside from that, we're pretty much on smaller roads, but we nonetheless have planners and rangers and various other staff who have to make trips across the whole national park, and that gives us a transport demand. Just to give you a quick historical view of our carbon reduction journey, as it were, we started in 2007 looking seriously at our carbon emissions and how to reduce that. So our starting point in 2007 to 8 was 770 tonnes for that year of carbon. And of that, just for context, internal combustion engine vehicles represented 271 tonnes out of that. So we were driving nearly 480,000 miles a year within our work in the authority. Our overall target, based on the sort of government targets at the time, was a 50% reduction by 2025. So that's the blue line was the sort of trajectory of carbon reduction that we were looking at during that time. So the last full year of figures that I have available is 2018 to 19. I'm afraid I haven't quite finished off last year's yet because the coronavirus and furlough came along, which has got in the way of things a little bit. So at that point, the last full year of information we have available, we were driving 425,000 or so miles a year, which is about 11% down in terms of mileage. That was about 121 tonnes of carbon emissions, carbon equivalent emissions, which was a reduction of 55%, which is obviously more than 11%. And that's partly because we'd taken various measures to make our transport more efficient, in particular, getting rid of a smattering of larger vehicles and trying to eliminate as far as possible our grey mileage, in other words, staff using their own vehicles on authority business. So we moved to a model of having a pool fleet. So this was our pool fleet of mostly small Fiestas, and people were pretty much obliged to use pool vehicles rather than their own vehicles, which in conjunction with what we call our travel hierarchy, which is basically a cascade of, do you need to make the trip? Could you make the trip by public transport? Could you share a lift with someone else? All of these things helped to reduce our transport emissions over that time. So that was the situation up until a couple of years ago. Now, a couple of years ago, especially in response to the Paris Agreement and other moves within a global understanding of carbon emissions, we've moved more to a model of net zero, looking for net zero emissions rather than just a percentage reduction. So again, at the year 2018 to 19, our known emissions amounted to 436 tonnes per year. And we are projecting how we can reduce that down as much as we possibly can. So our target year for net zero is 2025, which is pretty challenging, obviously, especially in the light of time we've lost this year. So by various means, we think we can reduce that down to 158 tonnes per year. And then in terms of net zero, we then have to balance that up with offsetting or producing our own electricity via solar panels or whatever in some form or other. So offsetting, it might be to do with tree planting, we might be able to use peat restoration, various other things we might want to do. But the transport, which is what we're focusing on today, plays a key part in that, and that's the red area on the graph. So we're looking at reducing that by about a third, and that's mostly through the introduction of 18 electric vehicles into our pool fleet, replacing 19 existing pool vehicles. And we estimate that will reduce our emissions by around about 40 tonnes per year. So just to put a little bit of detail into that, this is our current fleet. So in terms of pool vehicles, we have mostly Ford Fiestas, 12 of those, and then we have a smattering of slightly larger vehicles for various purposes. And in 2018-19, we drove 177,000 miles, and that amounted to about 41.6 tonnes of carbon emissions. We do have what we might call working vehicles. These are, broadly speaking, these are 4x4s of one sort or another that mostly our rangers are using for getting onto sites which are off-road, pulling trailers, taking plant to sites, all of that sort of thing. And just a quick word on those. For the time being, you know, we do have a future aspiration to replace those with electric vehicles, but for the time being, we haven't settled on a suitable electric alternative to these vehicles, which is affordable to us and which is workable in terms of charging. So that's an open question. But going back to our pool vehicles, as I say, we're going to replace those. In fact, we are in the midst of replacing those with 18 pool vehicles, which are electric. So that's 13 BMW i3s and 5 Renault Kangoos. So obviously we would like to reduce the mileage as well, but presuming upon the same mileage as previously for comparison purposes, we reckon that amounts to about 16 tonnes of emissions if we remain on grid electricity, brown electricity, which is our current situation. But we are planning to switch to a fully renewable tariff, which of course will reduce our emissions to virtually zero. All we're left there with is transmission and distribution emissions from the electricity. So that's the vehicle replacements we're planning to make. And obviously, and just to illustrate that, this is one of the BMW i3s we already have, looking a little bit grubby because it's already been out on site. This is a Kangoo, not one of ours, but one that's in the pipeline. So those vehicles obviously have to be supported by a charging network, which is what Alasdair's been talking about. So this is the current state of play with installation of charge points. We are in the process, in the sort of bluish writing, we're in the process of getting several of our sites geared up with charge points. So starting with, this is over on the left, this is pretty much the same picture that Alasdair showed earlier on. This is one of the new rapid chargers at our headquarters in Kendal. So we've got 2 rapid chargers going in there. We've already got 10 fast chargers have been put in place at Merley Moss, our headquarters. At our northern office, we're having 6 fast chargers put in and 2 rapid chargers. Over our southern office, down towards the bottom end of Windermere Lake, we've got 6 chargers which have already been installed. And then we also had a smattering of charge points already throughout the national park, mostly in our public car parks, but 1 or 2 of these double up. So it's probably worth pointing out that in every instance except our southern office, these charge points will support both our authority vehicles, but also they will be available to the public. So it's an important part of our remit that we want to improve the charging network to enable the move towards electric vehicles nationwide. Just 1 or 2 challenges to point out. Obviously, finance is a challenge. These things aren't cheap. And at 2 of our locations, because of the local power network being insufficient, we're having to upgrade the local power network with our own little substations at a cost of around about £80,000 or so, each of those. we've been lucky enough to receive European Structural and Investment Fund money to cover most of the cost of installing the chargers and upgrading the power network. As I say, power supply is an issue, and unfortunately some of our more rural car parks we've had to rule out for the time being, putting charge points in just because the local network isn't sufficient to support it. But we are looking into including battery storage so that we could get a trickle charge into a battery overnight that could then charge vehicles during the day. That's something we're investigating. And then car park space is also something to consider. We're having to balance up if we set aside parking space for electric vehicles. Depending on the demand on those parking spaces, how does that compare with parking spaces already in use? So there's some of the challenges. If people have any other questions, I'm very happy to try to answer those, but that's pretty much it from me. Thank you very much. And my email address is there and can be made available afterwards if people have specific questions. Otherwise, I'll hand back to Andrew.
Thanks very much, Martin, for that. Yeah, it's really interesting in terms of how you've gone about it. And again, we've got some questions, but I'll just deal with them. So I'm now just going to hand over finally in terms of presentations to my colleague John Farley. So John, are you there?
Yeah, thanks Andrew, and thanks Alasdair and Martin for your presentations as well. They were both excellent. Very interesting to see the work you're doing at the Lake District National Park, so it's very interesting. I suppose I wanted to talk a bit about Fusion21, a bit about what we do and how we're helping our members. So Fusion21, basically we are a national framework provider, providing frameworks mainly to the built environment, procuring a range of different works. We've got a number of different frameworks, but in terms of assisting our members with the decarbonisation strategy, we've got an energy efficiency framework, we've got heating and renewables, and basically we've got in excess of 600 public sector bodies across the whole of the UK, and that's ranging from housing associations, local authorities, education establishments, health and wider public sector as well. Now, the frameworks that we've got in place are 4-year agreements, and both of the frameworks you can see on the bottom of the screen went live in early 2020 and are due to run for 4 years. They are simple and easy to access, and we're here to sort of assist our members in doing so. Let's change the slide, Andrew. Yeah, okay. And I just wanted to talk about our supply chain management and how we go about selecting our suppliers to actually be appointed to our framework. So the procurement process is fully ODU compliant. Part of the qualification that we put our supply chain through is based upon a PAS 91 specification. So we are checking our suppliers on their environmental standards, their approach to sustainability, relevant to this particular lot around innovation, so the use of new products, continually developing technology. We're also allowing the use of grant funding as well to be used through the framework and the supply chain. And another part of what we offer at Fusion21 is social value, which also creates training and employment opportunities through our procurement activities. Another part of the criteria for selecting our suppliers is based upon the technical competency. So we are looking for suppliers who've got the relevant accreditations and the technical competency and experience to deliver the specific works. So you can see on the last 2 points there, the type of accreditations that we look for our supply chain to when appointing them to the framework. Okay, Andrew. And I suppose this leads us through onto what we've been discussing today about electric vehicle charging points. So part of our framework, or specific lots of the framework, covers electrical vehicle charging points. It's a national framework and it's broken down into regions across the UK. So the suppliers have been selected in specific regions. Some have national coverage, some are specific to particular regions of the UK. We've got 13 suppliers appointed, and in particular AmpEV, who have done the presentation today, are appointed as well. There's call-off options as well, which are either direct award or further competition. Because of the innovation part of this, a lot of our members do tend to go down the direct award route, and that's mainly because they can have the early supplier involvement and technical expertise that they can bring to the table in terms of when they're initially scoping out the project. So that is an option available that we can assist our members with. So following on from today, if anyone does have any inquiries or would like to discuss this further, please find my contact details below on that slide. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John, and again, thanks to Alasdair and Martin. There are a few questions. I'm also sort of conscious of time. We are fast approaching 3 o'clock, and I know people will have other things to do. But just a couple of, and I'm going to sort of start at the same question, and I'm sort of going to come to you first, Martin. And then Alasdair, which is around the sort of cost of all this. Again, you alluded to that in sort of two ways. One is the sort of the cost of replacing the fleet, so the capital cost involved, as well as the capital cost of installing the charging network. You know, like most authorities, cash, and again, you mentioned some European funding support. I mean, is this why, you know, government support to allow this to happen in terms of how this was announced yesterday is so important if as a country we are going to achieve the targets, and would you or could you have done it without it?
I think in terms of the fleet, it's something we would have done regardless of external funding, and ultimately it's going to save us money. We reckon the break-even point is around about 5 or 6 years off, but we reckon we will save about 60% on fuel, and we're saving £300 a year on vehicles, servicing and that kind of thing. The charging infrastructure is a more difficult question, and obviously, it has helped to propel us forward a long way, having this European funding. In terms of the substations we've had to pay for, that's entirely an accident of geography, in a sense, what's available in the local power network. And obviously, the WC assistance helps. In a sense, we're at the cutting edge here, aren't we? We're still opening out nationally in terms of charge point infrastructure, and as that improves, the costs of it should diminish.
Yeah. Alasdair, what would be your comment?
Yeah, my input on that and our kind of experience and observations working with organisations is that they don't manage it as one big lump sum investment. Organisations that have a fleet of company vehicles are more often than not leased. So as those vehicles come to the end of their term, they are replacing them with EV vehicles. So it's like a rolling progression, if you will. And of course, if they've got a number of fleet vehicles and only some of them have become EV, they're building their electric vehicle infrastructure in a linear process as they're replacing their electric vehicles in their fleet. So it doesn't have to be this one big outlay of cost. It can be a smooth transition.
Yeah. And again, in terms of, again, you alluded to it in your both of your presentations actually, which is then around the sort of national grid and, you know, the ability for us to, you know, to some extent generate enough electricity to charge all of these points. Again, Martin, you alluded to the challenges in some of your more rural areas around there just being a lack of capacity in the existing network. Again, how do we see those challenges being overcome? Again, I'll start with you, Martin, and then you, Alasdair.
Yeah, we're already aware that district network operators are moving more and more towards a sort of smart network approach, which tries to balance out peaks and troughs within supply on a kind of diurnal basis. That is going to help, and actually electric vehicles can play their part in that and actually acting as a storage mechanism, so that there's a sort of double gain there. And a couple of things we've already mentioned: local battery storage that enables perhaps charging up overnight in order to discharge during the day, little local power stations such as the hydrogen plant that was referred to earlier on. All of these things are going to help, and I think the government is intending to put more investment into power networks to enable these changes to happen.
Yeah. Alasdair?
Yes. Yeah, my contribution to that is really just echoing what Martin's just said there. I think solar needs to be considered as well. You know, any organisation with a roof space that would consider having solar panels on it, running in line with a local battery management storage system. There are some savings to be had there, and some good technical solutions which will ultimately get buildings to be off grid, which I think we're focusing on the domestic market and trying to get domestic homes off grid, but in the fullness of time, technology will allow us to get commercial properties and offices off grid as well. So it's going to be an interesting few years, that's for sure.
Yeah, it certainly will be, and lots of challenges ahead. John, did you want to?
Yeah, I mean, just looking at some of the questions that come through, and this is probably a technical one for you, Alasdair. If you could just give us a bit of an explanation on the difference between an AC and a DC charger.
Yeah,
what's
certainly.
The main differences.
So it's the technology that the charger provides and how it issues the power to the car. So not trying to get too electrically technical because I'm mindful of my audience, but AC is AC power, the old sinusoidal wave that you have at home, and DC power is your direct current, which you would expect to see from a battery. Now, AC power can be converted into DC power, and the advantage with DC power is it doesn't lose as much energy and it can take higher levels of energy output. So the cars will come with an AC charging circuit for use at home, but it's limited because of the energy losses. Cars can also accept a DC charging circuit, which means that they can take in a higher level of energy input, which charges the battery quicker. So to answer, hopefully I've answered the question in saying that the difference between the AC and the DC is just how it applies the energy to the car. The DC can provide higher energy levels into the car than the AC can. Hope that helps.
Yeah, no, thanks, Alasdair.
Thanks for that. So I'm conscious of time. We're sort of about 5 minutes over. So I'm going to wrap up this session in two ways. One is an actual round of applause quickly from me to Alasdair and to Martin and John for your presentations. We hope you've enjoyed that. A big thank you to you, our audience, for being with us this afternoon and for your contributions. If we've missed any of the questions, we will, as I said at the beginning, make them available and try and answer them offline and then send them round. We will also post a copy of the presentations and a rerun of this webinar on our website. So all that remains for me is to thank you for listening. We have our next webinar next week, which is around the launch of the Fusion21 materials framework, and then coming up the following week from Monday, the 30th of November, through to Thursday, 3rd of December, we are part of the Homes conference, and we've got a number of very interesting sessions on this subject and others at the Fusion21 Buy Smarter Theatre. So please look out for details of that, all of which are available on our website. So thank you very much for listening this afternoon, and as ever, stay safe and hope to see you all again soon. Thank you.